Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Steve Jewell. I'm with CommunityGiving, and we're really glad to have you with us here today for today's continuing Community Connections webinar series. We're going to give people just a chance to get into the room. So we wait just a couple seconds here and allow everybody to get in the room, but we're glad to have everybody with us today. We started this webinar series called Community Connections going back to when COVID first started and we all stayed at home, and have focused on a variety of issues important to our communities and the communities we serve. And starting after the murder of George Floyd, we turned our attention to focus on how we as a community can continue to build bridges and do better as communities, in particular around the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we've had a variety of speakers on this topic. And you can find all of our previous webinars, which are recorded at communitygiving.org. And so if you want to look back at any of those, we're more than welcome to do so. And we will be continuing this series one a month for the next 6 months. And we're delighted to have with us today Dr. Les Green. Les has a very strong, rich history in the community of St. Cloud, and he has joined us today. He is a former head of cultural, I want to get this correct. His title at St. Cloud State was Director of the Office of Cultural Diversity at the College of Education at St. Cloud State University. He also is a member of the Board of Directors of St. Cloud School District number 742. He did serve on the Board of Directors for 9 years with the Central Minnesota Community Foundation, also on the board of the Minnesota Council on Foundations, so has a rich history in philanthropy as well. And we're delighted to have him with us today to talk about some of the history as well as some of our opportunities going forward. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Les Green. Les, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Steve. I'm delighted to be here. I want to just give people a bit of history so that there's an understanding about where this all starts, because as you can see on the screen, 1988 into 1999 is what we're going to talk about. We're actually going to talk about 1988 all the way through to 2021. But in 1988, there was the homecoming at St. Cloud State University ended in what was a rather massive riot. And at that time, the police were trying to control things and wound up going into the Black Student Union, which was late at night, but there was an authorization for the students to be there with an advisor. And there was a great deal of difficulty in the whole, there was a big kind of an understanding of not a good situation. It was at that time that I became a member of the board, and that when Al Didier and others were starting this foundation. And so it was the original board of directors, and I actually helped write the mission statement. And I'm just going to give you a flavor of that, but basically there was no foundation in the St. Cloud area that could receive the kinds of funds that were generated out of some rather wealthy people in the area. So what Al was trying to do was retain wealth developed in the area, and then also guide the area's social and economic growth. And when this foundation started in 1988, I remember I was on the board, the General Grants Committee board, and to know that the size of our foundation, our first total general grant dispersal in 1988 was $2,500. That is substantially different now. We also at that time were known as White Cloud. St. Cloud and Central Minnesota region had a reputation of being one of the most racially hostile communities in the nation. Many forms of discrimination, housing, jobs, harassment were the cause of that. And it also seemed that public officials seemed indifferent to the complaints. Reputation seemed valid to me, but it was not unlike other places. It was just exaggerated a bit. Most people that I was aware of in the community that I worked with were concerned about what was happening. Most people did not know what to do. And so that was where we started this. Racial discrimination reduction activities have been a national activity since 1865. They were dangerous and required time and courage, but I believe were very successful, possibly 80% by 1990. Now that's where I'm talking about the issues of direct housing and racial discrimination that really interfered with the lives of most African-American people at that time. Racist behaviors that actually interfere with the lives of honest people who basically reach middle income status is occasional and unusual, but not well understood. Though it's very, very important, believe me, it's very important. One of the realities of America is that small groups of bigots, I'd say 20%, have such enormous influence on the perception of racial attitude of 60,000 other people. Behaviors cannot be removed from America. The impact of that is that if you take a 20%, you're looking at about 12,000 people in our entire community that are what I would call un-American and discriminatory, racist, if you want to call it that. But the fact of the matter is, that means that once per month, I would get small reminders that could interfere with your perception of life chances. And that happened to me here regularly. The problem is that once a month was at that point was taking away the other 30 days, or the other 29 days that you had. You know, these people who do this, this is a student organization when I was a student at St. Cloud State in 1968 called SPONGE, Society for the Prevention of Niggers Getting Everything. But these were the kinds of people that did it. Also, the school district would allow mice and men. The school district was allowing the kinds of curriculum that had children of 9th grade, 7th grade, actually reading the word nigger out loud. And so if there was only one black student in town in high school, and when they had to read that, it was very embarrassing. 1989, ADAPT was an ideal of business people in the Central Minnesota Community Foundation Board. The original purpose was to reduce racism, and this is what's real critical. Racism is bad for business. And Alex Didier, who was president of the foundation and president of First American National Bank at the time, which is now Bremer Bank, these guys, he would travel all over the country. And one of the things he found was that the reputation was a problem for us. If you're trying to bring money and jobs to our community, then the national corporations would hesitate to expand their businesses to the area because of concerns if they transferred high managers of color to the area, they would feel would be discriminated against. And local employers have trouble recruiting and retaining employees because in the top-notch employees around the country, because they just wouldn't come here because of the reputation. Business people saw it in their best interest, and this is what's real critical. We always hear the word that diversity has value, but what kind of value is it? Have I gone 15 minutes already? Oh, gracious, let me keep going. Racism is a moral issue, but the reason for sustainable action by these people was economic. Understood diversity as a direct economic value. They applied for a grant to the foundation or a project to reduce racism. That grant had the media campaign valuing diversity slogan and a celebration of diversity event and supporting diversity awards in it. Significant personal commitment by the board members, because what they had to do was were to invite people to their homes, 2 or 3 couples, and ask them to put money into the foundation for the purpose of matching the $500,000 grant to reduce racism. We did not get the grant, but the foundation sent $100,000, and the problem with that $100,000 is that the plan we had, which was a $1.5 million plan, or that they had, was not functional based on that. The money had to be sent back, or we had to have an alternative. That's when I was contracted by the foundation, even though I was a board member. And this became my first knowledge of the project, actually. I was not involved in the development of it. Discrimination, real and perceived and anticipated, constantly interferes with the belief in opportunity, value of preparation, and risk-taking for African-American people. Civil rights movement was to overcome, not end racism. The kinds of things you see on the screen were the kinds of things that we were met with every now and then, occasionally, but they were very devastating things. Modern problems facing people of color require internal and personal, not external and collective solutions. And I'll explain that hopefully sometime later. The important task that I viewed as reduction of impact of bigots to laughter and focused legal action when we could, rather than spending resources continually trying to change anti-American people. And the people who put stuff like that on walls are anti-American. They don't even understand America. They don't understand liberty and justice for all. So based on that, instead of, when I modified the project from reducing racism to promotion of racial harmony, change the audiences, the vision, which is the outcome, and strategies. Goal number one, I found good people of the area who really wanted to help but needed some direction. Audience number two was good people with legitimate diversity concerns that could be won over with positive observations. And audience number three was African Americans who wanted to feel welcome and wanted only opportunity. And for them, the strategy was, how do I reduce the impact of racism? Generally to have people of all races and cultures believe that honest, hardworking people are welcome in central Minnesota. What came out of this was the ADAPT project, and you'll notice the sextant, which was a navigation device used on ships for traveling long distances. But the Central Minnesota Community Foundation project to create the perception of racial harmony and valuing of diversity that adds value to the community. The purpose of ADAPT was to develop institutional, systemic, intuitive components with a life of their own that could develop a new reputation. And that is that we needed to do something that didn't have to be poked with a stick all the time, that it just had a life of its own. We wanted to create the perception that meaningful opportunity existed for everyone, and economic and social success could be achieved, and engage everyone in the community in the process of valuable mutual adaptation, meaning everyone changes for a little bit. A man named Thomas wrote a book called Soul and Management, and that's where I got that piece from. And the other thing was to interrupt outdated and incorrect rhetoric. And I think there's just a ton of that in terms of St. Cloud and the commentary about it. Some assumptions I made, and this is very critical: anticipate racially diverse growth. You got to understand that there were two families when I came here of color, but by the time our population in St. Cloud was about 3% students of color. My wife just came in the room, about 3% students of color. And that was, 3% people of color in the community, and most of that was students. The 80-20 rule, 20% of the people cause 80% of our problem. Most people are of goodwill. Most incidents are inadvertent or misperceptions. Maintain area cultural values because they're universal. Changing systems and structures is a long-term process, and that was the reason for the sextant, 25 to 50 years to overcome what I believed is a 500-year head start. And so it was important that we understood this was going to take a long time. The means describe the end. This is very important. It's not end justifies the means, that the positive methods result in positive ends. And a 5-year sundown, transfer, adapt to the community, both the assumptions and principles and activities to the community that would be run out of our community because it made sense to the community. My experience created the principles, and I'll tell you what they are. Work with positive people, and that was to develop relationships, reward positive responses. Even if people did the wrong thing, if they did it for the right reason, you reward it. In addition to, not instead of. I was not going to interfere with other people's activity. There was a lot of confrontational activity going on, and I wasn't going to get in an argument about whether that was right or wrong. My point was, we're going to do this on our own and see if we can make some sense out of what's happening to us. Blame-free, guilt-free, equal responsibility for the future, all of us. I don't care what your race is, that we all need to be responsible for this. Maintain civil discourse. We're going to talk to each other in a civil manner, that people had a license to not understand or to disagree, and that we wouldn't use sarcastic antagonism. It's basically, which I believe silences people who really want to help. and disperse influence and leadership. One of the problems that I had is that whenever anything racial came up, my telephone rang. Nobody talked to anybody else. And I'm not bragging about that. I'm just saying that that's what happened. I was of the opinion that we needed to disperse the influence of people of color. That influence ability needed to be dispersed through a lot of different people of color. And then consensus -1. You just can't please everybody. And everybody's not going to be happy with what we're doing or why we're doing it. Work quietly, and that's very critical because this project started in 1990 and nobody knew about it until 1993. We were going to coordinate, facilitate, and spectate, and that where we could help people pull things together to make sense of the world. It made sense. If somebody was doing something good, I wasn't going to get involved in it. Just simply was going to spectate. This is the model that we used to manage it, that I used to manage it. And it had 12 categories, and I'll go through them, what the categories were. Positive leadership, and that was to work with leadership people to develop their positive leadership and helping them figure out what they wanted to do to help this thing. Community welcome activities, create a perception in the mind of people of color that they were welcome, awareness of positive people of color, and that was to have observable people of color out in the community. Oh, good, okay. And education that promotes valuing diversity, examples and images when we worked with the school system. Community-wide diversity education, and trying to create a baseline so that everybody in the community sort of had a basic understanding of what the issues were and the problems and how we could all work together to make some sense out of this. Awards and recognition, you're doing a great job, show others. Basically what it meant was catch somebody doing something right and tell on them. Festivals and celebrations, embed things into the existing activities, whatever they were. Cultural arts, wanted to increase racially diverse opportunities to be involved in cultural art kind of things. Mass media, positive imagery as a socializing influence for both children and who don't see people of color very often, and you'll see those as we go on. Religious community, promote value of good people and imagery that they use. Resource development, which was a different kind of concept. It was distribution, not collection of funds. And so sometimes I would ask people to fund things like from Dale Munson at Wells Fargo Bank, would you fund this? And so we kind of did things like that to rather than try to get the money in and then we all tried to disperse it from the foundation. A diversity directory, which was an assessment model, and that basically was a quantitative activity would describe what we were doing and how well we were doing. Activities covered law enforcement also, but they were kept off the wheel because they're a lightning rod. I didn't want to have people focusing on law enforcement and what I was doing with them, although I worked heavily with law enforcement people. And the transfer to the community was not discussed because I thought it would distract people. Activity examples from 1990 to 1977, or 1997 and 98, described over 25, I have 2,500 field notes. I wrote my dissertation off of this. And I have over 2,500 field notes, individual field notes that range from 1 to 20 pages, and 2,700 photographs. I used a camera to take notes at meetings rather than try to take notes and have them figure them out later. I was actually taking pictures, and then I used the pictures to jog my memory so I could then write notes later on. I'm going to show you a few, but too many to show more than the computer files. And these are the computer files. If you look at them, it goes from 92 down to 2007, but 2007 is empty. And the numbers along the side tell you how many notes are in there. As an example, in 93, 68, if you go down to 1998, there were 396. It was a very busy year. And then each of the categories of the ADAPT project had a PowerPoint that I kept all of the pictures and all of the commentary inside a PowerPoint file, and there were 2,708 of them. And you'll see if in the PowerPoint files, the numbers along the side indicate what kind of content they have. And then these were what I called presentation templates that basically were to describe the ADAPT program when I'd go out to businesses and to other gatherings like I'm doing now to describe the project. What turned out about this is that this really became how we we told on people, because you'll see that in the pictures in just a moment. Many leadership people were involved in this. I had over the 5-year or 6-year period of time, there were 240 people who I have pictures of and commentary in one of the computer files about what they did and what they said and how we were doing that. If you see on the side, for example, in the one leadership area, we had faith community, people of color, mass media, government, celebration, entertainment, arts. Those kinds of things had all had leadership people in them. As we look at here, adaptive values, we talked to pastors and priests about how to include racial harassment reduction kind of things in their homily and sermon, building inclusive imagery, and also comparative reverence kind of things with kids. What is it, if you take American Indian religious practices and Catholic religious practices, what we did was bring people together and say, let me show you what the comparative reverence is of that. So that people understood that the Native American, which seems not to be as formal as the Catholic religious ceremonies, still are very, very critical and very religious oriented things. Awards and recognition, we had a number of awards that came out, Mayor's High Five Awards, JCPenney Golden Rule Awards, Chamber of Commerce Business Diversity Award, NAACP developed awards. All of this stuff happened not because you were telling people to do it, but there was a lot of ear whispering that I did that sort of said to people, why don't you give this a try or give that a try? And so that's how it happened. One of the major activities we were involved in, Mayor Chuck Winkleman and Jim Stigman, was to put magazines in waiting rooms so that when people sat down, they could read magazines. And we had Hispanic, Ebony, Native Peoples, and A Period, which is an Asian magazine that would be in the local dental association, asked, how can I help? And I said, subscribe to these magazines, put them in your waiting room so that people of color, when they come in, see them, and when other people come in, they can see them. Doctors' offices did the same thing. And you note that the mayor, Chuck Winkleman, had a very large diversity award or diversity training kind of program with Dr. Edwin Nichols. There were 300 people involved in that, and the training went over so well. And in the St. Cloud Employee Association came to me and said, you know, we were so terrified about we were going to be beat up in this thing, and this guy was so good. We've organized 2 more sessions, and that's where there were 600 people. So 900 people wound up in a training program off the first one we had. Then my Pride project, which is the St. Cloud Friendly Community Project of Waving and Welcome. Most people, when they are involved with people they don't know or they haven't seen before, they wind up staring at them. And so what I was trying to do with this was teach people to what to do when they get caught staring. And your mother taught you what you do when you make eye contact. You go, hi, how you doing? And so that's what this was all about. But there was a student project that basically walked up to students of color and said, hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm doing a project in a class, and we're developing waving relationships so that we can try to make the campus and the community feel more welcoming to people. Not trying to develop long-term friendships, just simply, if I see you walking on the street, I can wave at you. And student of color community work study, got students of color off campus, out into the community, into other kinds of situations of working in the mayor's office, the school district, and so that staff could see that these students were just like other people. And the pictures you see on the screen are the St. Cloud Children's Home, and where we had people working there. In 1994, awareness of positive people of color. Again, it's a mayor's office intern. Lucy Kamalo was at intern working working at Bremer Bank. And then the newspaper started having interns of color involved in the program. But if you look at the list, Bremer Bank, Coburn's, Wells Fargo, all of them had interns or jobs for students of color off campus. St. Cloud schools they said, we have 800 people that are non-licensed that work for us. We'll guarantee you 50 of those jobs for students, which was a substantial amount of money. This was kind of interesting because Dale Munson was a creating jobs issue, and this is a newspaper article of a young woman, Black woman, who was in the teller line, the drive-up teller line. And he created an internship for students of color, 3 of them, to work in the bank. And they did a newspaper article about it. And so what was funny is that they asked Dale, why are you doing this? Why are you creating this jobs? He said, and Dale says, to make money. And then the newspaper says, but isn't it the right thing to do? And Dale Munson, I mean, this is the kind of people I worked with. Dale Munson says this, it may be, but we are in business to make money. Having people of color on our staff brings people of color into our facility with their needs and their money. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. That's the stuff that will continue. If you can, if what you're doing causes people to come into your facility with their money, you're going to keep doing what's good for your business. Leadership area in the Chamber of Commerce, Tom Moore, Mike Paquette, and Ken Warner, and Teresa Bonin, who all were presidents of the Chamber, carried on with this process over the years. The Chamber developed a diversity council from 1995 to 97. But the really important part of this was the diversity mission statement that came out of it. And the purpose of the diversity task force is to assist the Chamber in its mission to enhance a healthy business environment for the benefit of its members and the community. The task force will accomplish this by facilitating projects that promote, educate, and inform the members about the value of recognizing consumer and employee diversity and special needs. That's the kind of stuff we were doing. And again, when Tom Moore, the president of the Chamber, said, this is for your benefit to help you recruit employees, to help you make money, that stuff keeps going. Advertising was a major focus of ours. And the Tide commercial, if you know anything about the first Tide commercial that was on television back in the, I don't know when it was, I was just a kid and my mother was screaming about something on the television. All of a sudden, Black women were starting to call each other because Tide had used a Black woman in a commercial on television. And it was an unbelievable moment in our history. And so that I remembered that. And so the Chamber, newspaper advertising, and Walkabout, I'll explain those, and I think we'll get together. This is the St. Cloud Times. Sonia Sorensen Craig began to use people of color in her ads. And then if you looked at St. Cloud Times advertising images used by 1995, 25% of the people in the newspaper, images of humans used in advertising were people of color. Also, St. Cloud Times is consistent use of positive images and stories in the lifestyle section. These are ones that I, at the time, had to mount and laminate to have them sustained. But basically, the newspaper was putting people of color in their ads. And this became the first, in 1993, Gilliland Chevrolet uses an African-American woman in a major billboard ad on Division and Highway 15. I just still was shocked by it. But then 97, a Prudential billboard on Cooper Avenue used an African-American family. Zap Bank, which is a local bank next out by Fingerhut, which was Fingerhut at the time, used African-American family as part of their ad. Hall Buyers billboard or their lawyers firm used an African-American family as a part of their billboard. So we began to do this. And this, I want you to understand, this is more advertising using people of color than was done in Minneapolis and St. Paul. This one I love. This is Wells Fargo home mortgage lobby poster featuring a Latino family. Look at the circle, and then you'll see what this is. This is about, the thing on the thing says, on the poster says, there's never been a better time to buy your new home. This is a man, and his wife is clearly pregnant, and he's got his head on her belly. And I mean, it's just a fabulous ad that I loved, and it was in the lobby at Wells Fargo Bank. This is some friends' appliance repair center. I walked in there and they have this poster up. It's got an African-American woman, a female on the paper, as a poster advertising some of their business things. This is how we provided people with what I would call recognition, because I used these pictures, and when people saw them, they did it. This is Walmart eyeglasses. For those of you who don't remember him. That's my brother, Ken Green, who's passed away now, but he was in a number of ads in Dayton's and other places like that. Norwest and Wells Fargo, in their lobby had, and in their brochures. St. Cloud Camera Shop used, the first time I ever saw this, people of color in things to sell pictures. Baker Square, a 24 by 30-inch African-American man with a big piece of pie. This is Firestone store in St. Cloud. And this is the walkabout that I'm talking about. We started at the Mississippi River and walked with a massive group of students, walked from Mississippi River to Crossroads to figure out just how many people used images of people of color. 25% of the images of human beings used in advertising in St. Cloud in 1996 were that. This is Crossroads Center. One of the things I was doing was taking pictures of people who had ads that used people of color. I was doing it at Crossroads Center. The problem with that is that, that stuff's copyrighted, and so they called security on me. But before security got there, the manager would say, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm taking pictures of your advertising, because advertising with people of color is what makes people feel welcome in a community, and you guys are doing a good job." Well, David Brown then says, "I can't do that," but he said, "I tell you what, Les, when you're out there working, do it as quickly as you can. My staff and I will take our time to the calls of the guy with the camera." So people of color, 1992, were 3% of the people in ads at Crossroads Center. These were the kinds of ads. People of color images in 1997 were 36%. 5 years later, all you do is count all the pictures of human beings and then divide by whatever. People of color images kind of rounded off at about 25% at Crossroads Center. By the way, Mall of America is 16%. Miller Center in Duluth was 14%. So I'm just, and again, we have a community that's less than 5% people of color. And those communities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, you know what they are. So we're trying to anticipate this thing. This is my insurance man. I was talking to him about this, and he said, "Well, I can look at these, Les." And so he winds up with a great deal of brochures and calendars that are used as illustrating their business, and they have people of color on it. Festivals and celebrations. Mark Bregelman added multicultural events to Wheels, Wings, and Water Festival. Bonnie Klitsky, First Human Rights Day. Bethlehem Lutheran Church, I thought this was interesting. I'm sitting in church because there's a function there. I'm looking through their songbook, and in their songbook is Lift Every Voice and Sing. And not an insert, but it comes in their songbook. So it's noticing the things that I think are important. First of all, it helps people understand what you're doing and recognize it. Hire people of color. Often asked to hire people of color. My response was always, don't try to hire people, try to get them to apply. If you get them to apply, what happens then is that you get to look at a lot of different people. And if you're just trying to hire somebody, you're gonna hire whatever you get. But the point is that you can hire the good ones, and then there are some you don't want working for your competition. So that happens also. When I said use images, don't, equal opportunity employer at the bottom doesn't mean a lot. But when you put pictures, Cold Spring Granite, ABC Seamless Siding, again, if you look down here at the Firestone store, there's my brother in the bottom in the middle. He's a very big man too. Doctors' offices in Home Depot. We sent people to the Holocaust Museum, 320 to be exact, to have an awareness. And most of them were teachers to have an understanding of this. And eventually, David Ebnett, who was a director of the Stearns County Historical Society, picked up on this and had Jewish women's exhibit on the prairie, Smithsonian Instas, like Wade in the Water, which is an African-American traveling exhibit, and Tuskegee Airmen also. We had a number of those exhibits in St. Cloud. The Wheels, Wings, and Water Festival had eventually wound up closing it with a Indian powwow, and it opened with a gospel choir. And sources was Betsy Mahold, who I worked with a great deal, developed this sources, which told us this is what you're doing. So 1998 to 2000, this is when opportunity knocks, and I'm going to try and go through this quickly. There's a situation at St. Cloud State University in which a person put KKK on my daughter's message board in 1998. What then happens is President Groupie, in what I called a very courageous action, got really outraged. And he put together a group of people that he said, you have to change what's happening. And the content of his response was important. And so what he did was put some people together to solve this problem. And he said, I want it solved now. Courage plan, 32 specific written items with timelines for completion and people responsible, monthly meetings to monitor progress of each responsible unit, quarterly official progress reports. Every item must be completed, and do it or you will lose your job. Now, understand, I mean, people have said that before, but he did it. Somebody decided they didn't have time to get done what they were supposed to get done. And I realized that the person actually did lose their job. And I'm not talking, I mean, this was a very high ranking official. And the problem, this is what the program looked like. There was, this is the letter at the beginning of it. It was focused and outrageous. Section 4 said, university has an intentional role in the region to create racial harmony. The responsible person was President Bruce Groupie, and academic affairs, Suzanne Williams. President Groupie calls the mayor and said to discuss developing a process. On January 28th, 1998 is the first policymaker community meeting. Larry Meyer, the mayor, puts together this policymaking group of 27 people, and they were all policymakers, people who could move and direct staff to do things. The group was all white, and let me tell you, Larry Meyer was having a little serious problem with that. He said, Leslie, we can't do it that way. I said, we have to do it that way because it'll change if we do it that way. Because no people of color were legitimate policymakers at that time in St. Cloud, okay? Advice from people of color. What we did was ask the policymakers in each group that headed up that area to pick 6 people of color that they could trust to advise them as they met with and talked about what kind of things they ought to do. Additional 90 people added to that and developed relationships that created trust and spread influence. This is what Larry Meyer's plan looked like. It looks familiar, but it's a mission, promotion of racial harmony, inclusive, equity, opportunity, equal opportunity through mutual adaptation. Vision, create the perception and reality of racial harmony. Larry's policy was, I'm going to host policymakers quarterly. We're going to share activities, coordinate efforts and positive efforts and things of that nature. What's on the side there is what Larry called his pluralism plan. And first things he did with the pluralism plan, can't say it, is to have what he called a public speak out. And what he did was had community policymakers sit in the audience at City Hall while other people of color came and made commentary. Now, what I did was have 7 people of color sit at the city council chambers and just nod and make, and have affirming comments. And the other people sat in the back, they were told their stories. And we heard a lot of stuff. From this information was developed. Racial harmony is an achievable goal, but there are no quick and easy solutions. We were there, we videotaped and transcripted this process. We started at 7 o'clock, supposed to be 7 to 9. We got out of there at 11 o'clock at night, and just an unbelievable number of stories. Housing discrimination, job discrimination, all these things were what was the issue. And they wanted effective solutions. These are the policymakers. Now, this is how it worked. Central Minnesota, you can see the government area, and government went Cold Spring, Sartell, Holdingford, Sauk Rapids. All the mayors in those areas would get together and say, what can we do to help our entire area look good? And so they would plan things. Out of the Speak Out came Fair Schools Project. Mike Holman, who's a fire chief, was doing some firefighter recruiting. And Dr. Mary Howard is appointed to the Civil Service Board by Larry Meyer. Now, this is what happens when you change institutions. Civil service rule change that allowed fire and police departments to select from the top 2/3 of the people who passed the test instead of the top 3. Negotiated by Human Rights Chair, Reverend James Alberts, who was a very young man back then in 1998, and Fire Chief Mike Holman. The rule change removed the single greatest barrier and the most often used excuse that people of color and women could not be hired or promoted, did not score in the top 3. It's a minuscule point difference, 5-point differentials between top 3 and the top 2/3. Institutional structural barrier, the first cut for hiring new teachers, for example, in St. Cloud, was a 3.75 GPA. No significant correlation between that and being able to teach. So structural and systemic rules are not necessarily for discrimination, they're for convenience. That's because I recall in Sauk Rapids, they had 3 elementary education openings and 1,100 applications. I said, and I talked with Greg Vondell. I said, that's not true. He said, yes, it is. And then I went to St. Cloud, same thing. They had 900 for 6 openings back then. In terms of diversity training, developed understanding and diversity training, 17,000 people were involved in diversity training in St. Cloud. You see Jerry McCarter down there talking with Fabinius from the hospital, and some people talking with Dale Munson from Norwest Bank. But Julie K. Peters was the real architect of this process, which was very good because it connected people with things that they felt were unfair in their own lives. But mayors, city councils, and county commissioners from Sartell, Sauk Rapids, and you can read the list, all got in the training. Central Minnesota school boards, you can see those, all were in the training process. And this was kind of interesting. Housing discrimination. They wanted to do research on whether or not there's discrimination in housing in St. Cloud. And I said, this is America. You don't need to spend $60,000 to figure out whether people are discriminated in housing. People need housing. So this is Dave Kiefler, who owns 65 housing units. We asked him 1 unit per building, low-income people, 3-month lease, 10 out of 10 people, and no application, okay? If you had 10 applications, only 3 of the people actually qualified for housing. They could be denied based on that. In this situation, all 10 got it. What they had to do was do a renter's class on what's the renter's responsibility. We had an emergency small loan program. There's a lot of people in St. Cloud who are living on the edge, have a job, and the transmission goes out in their car. And what happens when the transmission goes out in your car? You can't get to work. You lose your job and things go bad for you. The foundation created the Good Samaritan Fund to make sure those things could be dealt with. This is Get Qualified. Gary Marsden and Andy Hilger were very useful in this. It's called Project Bootstrap. It costs $7,000 a year to go to St. Cloud State University. And what we asked people to do was put up the money to pay half of what it costs to go to school. We had a number of dropouts in our community, college dropouts who were working at things like Boys and Girls Club in the schools and all those kinds of things. And we were worried that their images and their role modeling was bad. So we brought them back to school, paid the tuition. This is Andy Hilger's meeting room, and Andy and well, I can't get the names now. I'm too wound up to get them, but Don Watkins and Hall and Sonia Sorensen Craig from the newspaper, and I can't think of the other guy's name. He was at Rimmer Bank, worked on these things. But Andy Hilger would bring 6 people together, 6 or 7 people together. We'd tell them the idea and ask them to donate. These people were pulling $3,500 out of their pocket for to help students. We'll pay half, you work for the other half. Mr. Hall said, I'll take 2 students, $7,000, you know. So this is Sauk Rapids Rice Schools for a Changing Word. Okay, I'm real close to what I need to be hanging up here, and I'll do it. 24 educators to develop a place in Sauk Rapids to do that. Parent times, and here's the difference. If you recall, back in January of 1998, we had 27 people in the room. They're all white because that's who the policymakers were. If you bounce forward to 2000, between 2020 and 2021, and did the same thing, let me show you what happens. In that room now, taking the place of who used to be there, because they're now policymakers in those positions. I was chairman of the school board. Mary Howard was chair of the Civil Service Board. The person on the right over there was the person who ran some other things. But we basically changed the world. The police chief in St. Cloud is an African-American. The school superintendent is an African-American. The person that is 2 college presidents. So, and this is our first Somali lead principal who then jumped ship on us and went down to Minneapolis. But that's what it's designed to do. We need to have people move out. And Jesus Sandoval, the assistant principal. St. Cloud Schools, teachers of color in 2010, 2021 was staff. This is teachers of color, 6%. So the point of all this is the method's transferable. What we did was try to help people figure out a way to make some sense out of how to do something in a positive way without ganging up on people and doing that. So value of the method, it focuses energy and expertise and authority of people. And the staff that you're working with agree on it. Coordinates management of a community-wide effort, and policymakers are informed by, I was going to say they're informed by people of color, but the policymakers are now people of color. Tell you what I'm going to do. I will go through this slide. I'm not going to talk about it, but basically the principles, you know about them, and this webinar will be available, and actually the whole PowerPoints will be available. And this reality, much of what we do is, well, tell you what, social justice issues are not a sprint. It's a series of marathon steeplechase style races. In reality, much of the change comes in small constructive points. The landfill history cannot be moved. It's just got to be covered over with more good than bad. The goal is to get people and things to lean toward justice. We've been doing this for 30 years in a 50-year project. Central Minnesota Community Foundation started something 30 years ago that none of us knew would get this big and work this well. But when you provide people with an opportunity to do what's in their own best interest, then they keep doing it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Les. So we do have some questions, and some of that will help to pull out some of the information. So we have a question here. Let's see. Where do you think St. Cloud is at today on this topic? And what would be the 3 top areas where you believe we need to continue to focus our efforts for positive change?
I think that St. Cloud is way ahead of the rest of the world because we have the infrastructure now. I think that the 3 top things, number 1 is to look at education in a different way, that we continue to try and, well, let me back up and say it this way. Students of color, people of color, have to figure out how to manage America. And I think that our educational system and other people need to help them do that, because basically you can get to a middle income, which I would say is $65,000 to $120,000 a year, regardless of what kind of discrimination goes on around. But needing to be prepared for it, get an education, and that's where we have to figure out a way not to try and worry so much about equity in education. What we need to worry about is creating the perception in the mind of a student that they need an education, that an education will be good for them, that they'll be able to succeed if they get qualified. And so I don't know what the third one is. I think that our police department is way ahead in terms of the way they operate and the way they do things. One of the things I did in this project was do a police officer speak out. I have an 1.5-hour video of 6 police officers who are talking about what happens in the street and what happened to them and how they felt about it. And it's fabulous. And being able to talk to them, I think, would be something of use for people. So I'll answer that question that way.
Great. Another question. If you compared the representation of people of color in media from the past, from the mid-90s to today, would you say that it remains positive, or do you see change in the way media represents people of color?
Well, I think that there will always be places where the representations will be less than what we want. We had a specific idea of saying we were trying to represent ordinary people who did ordinary things in the newspaper, so that when it was sitting on a table or something, kids could read it and they would see that, or they could read about people of color. I think the media has such influence, I mean, enormous influence, that if they want to do something, they can do whatever they choose. I mean, for people to pay whatever millions of dollars they pay for 30 seconds in the Super Bowl game, you know the media has influence. And so it's a matter of sitting down and talking to the media people and saying, how would you like to participate in this? Because I think one of the dangers we have is trying to point fingers at somebody and say, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. So the representation of the media is irrelevant right now. What's relevant is let's talk to media people carefully and not try to have a big hoopla with everybody there saying somebody's taking on the media. Let's whisper in people's ears and say, here's how you can help us make some sense out of this thing we call America. And that's what I would suggest on it.
Great. We have another person who had made the comment that they had applied for a job that required a high school diploma. They have an associate's degree and they did not receive the job. And so they're wondering about how do you handle that discrimination then? Well,
first of all, let me just, I was in a situation this morning where we were hiring an assistant superintendent and went through the interviews. There's two people. One of them is not going to get the job. I don't know which one, but one of them is not going to get the job. And it doesn't mean they're discriminated against because they don't get a job. Just because you don't get what you want doesn't mean it doesn't mean you're not qualified for a job, but maybe their needs were different. And what people have to do is stop falling back on that perception of discrimination as my problem, as opposed to, well, I just have to go somewhere else because, if they've got an associate's degree and if they make some sense to the people that are hiring them, then, you just keep trying. That's one of our dangers, that we keep wanting to, not them, but if the media continues, or not, if anybody continues to allow discrimination to always be the fallback, the number one choice of why you didn't get a job, then nobody ever gets to look at themselves and say, well, maybe I need to work harder or do something different. So, I mean, discrimination back when I was a kid, my dad went to get a job places and they used to say, well, we don't hire Negroes in Minneapolis. And that is true. That's what happened back then. But my dad in 1952 still was able to buy our own home, put clothes on my back and send me to school with the rest of his 5 children for some reason. And that was a different and more difficult time in history. I'm not saying that that things are good. What I'm saying is we've got a launch pad. And we need to look at what kind of positive things we can do to make some sense out of that world. And that just because if you have an Associate of Arts degree, you're well on your way to being very, very desirable for most employers. And by the way, don't quit there. Get the 4-year degree and keep going after that, because those kids are looking at you, brother or sister, whoever you are. They're looking at you. They want to know whether education is valuable. And if you demonstrate to them that it's valuable by continuing your education, then that's what makes sense to me.
And then the final question is, how would you say the ADAPT approach is different from the activist approach?
Let me liken it as a toolbox. The ADAPT approach is a very quiet assumption dealing with people who are asking you how they can help. They're saying to you, I don't know what to do. I really would like to help. The activist approach on the other side is saying, we have to deal with people who don't know what's going on, don't want to know, or they're arguing with us. And so what's important about the toolbox is that a friend of mine, well, I call him friend, Buster Cooper. Buster Cooper was Buster Cooper invited the police chief out in the alley to fight a couple of times, Dennis O'Keefe back when we were at meetings. But Buster Cooper and all activists hold all of our feet to the fire. If we don't have them, then we all get complacent. So I may be I'm not an activist like that, but the fact of the matter is, if it wasn't for them, ADAPT would not have happened. So, I mean, we all have to recognize that we're all in this together. We're all going to work together. Well, we don't necessarily work together because they get too loud and scream and stuff, you know, and I can't hear things. But the fact of the matter is I recognize their value to what I do. But they have to make sure that we don't lose good people who are trying to help us. So,
Great.
all righty.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Les. This has been invaluable. And I want to thank everyone who stayed and listened for this hour. We are interested in your having the opportunity to tell us what you think about this one and other webinars. If you have someone that you want to share it with, we do have this saved on our website on communitygiving.org. So you can look at this or any of the other webinars that we've had so far in our Community Connections. And we invite your feedback. So if you've got some thoughts about this particular webinar or any that you'd like to see us bring forward, please contact your executive director in your community and let them know. Our next webinar is this Thursday geared towards our professional advisors. It is on holistic planning. That will be at noon on March 9th. Please join us for Rural Minnesota Brain Gain. Everyone have a wonderful evening and we will see you the next time.